Hey,
I don't know what else to do.
good evening, and hey, everybody. Welcome to Real Talk with Ellison, and I am Ellison. On Real Talk, on this show, we talk about real issues that directly impact the people of God and the community that surrounds it. And as always, for all of you guys who are out there joining me on Facebook, I ask if you go ahead and hit that like button and share this out, right? And if you're joining us on YouTube, smash the subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on our latest videos and shows, and you can watch any of our older shows. All right, well, today we are going to be talking about domestic violence. October is not only Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but it is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we want to go ahead and just enlighten you on some information about domestic violence. And before I get started, I wanted to say this. Family violence refers to threatening or other violent behaviors within families that may be physical, sexual, psychological, or even economical, right? And it can include child abuse as well as intimate partner violence. Okay, so I wanted to just share that domestic violence can take various forms. It can be physical, emotional, sexual, psychological. It can span across all races, all cultures, genders, sexual orientation, social economic classes, and even religion. So domestic violence knows no boundaries. And talking about domestic violence awareness today, joining me is Miss Montgomery from the Genieve Shelter. She will be joining me about enlightening you guys on domestic violence awareness. Good evening, Miss Montgomery. It's good to see you. How are you?
Nervous. Good evening. Good evening. Good to see you.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Well, I think she's having technical difficulties with her sound. Right, but this is Miss Montgomery of the Genieve Shelter, and she helps domestic violence. And I will go ahead and talk while we're waiting on her. And I wanted to just bring up some statistics that has recently been released since COVID. Now, since COVID, the United States has reported an increase in domestic violence abuse, the incidence ranging from 21 to 35%. That is because now everybody's home, everybody's dealing with stress, and they don't have the proper coping skills. So now this is where the violence tends to increase, whether it is verbal abuse, right? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and even financial abuse. That is 31 to 35% increase in domestic violence incidents. That is a huge number. And we're doing this show so that we can bring awareness to each and every one of you guys, because nobody knows what domestic violence looks like. We don't walk around with a bandana or a scarf or anything that says, hey, I am being abused, right? So I just wanted to bring that up. And also, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men also experience domestic violence, right? That is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men. And there are so many people who did not know that men also are victims of domestic violence. And unfortunately, we don't even know if that statistic is accurate, because most men will not report if they have been abused or are being abused, whether it's verbally, physically. Stalking is also a form of abuse, unfortunately, rape. And there has been an increase in homicides as well with domestic violence. And you'll hear me use the wording domestic violence and intimate partner interchangeably, because basically it's the same thing, right? And studies of intimate partner, in homicide, found that 20% of the victims were not the intimate partner themselves, but a family member. That's why it's so important to be able to identify with someone who may be going through domestic violence. Okay. I also wanted to say it's important to identify, and I think Ms. Montgomery must have lost connection or something. So I'm going to go ahead and just go through this, as give you as much information as I can. I am not the expert on it. However, I have, a little bit of knowledge personally, as well as I have worked with Miss Montgomery as well. Okay. So, all right. I think Miss Montgomery is coming back on. All right. I think we're experiencing technical difficulties, and I just want to apologize about that. Okay. All right. Okay, so like I was saying, I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but hey, this is the internet, right? And we don't have no response, and it's live. So we don't have no kind of control over when the internet have issues or anything else. So hang in there with us as we work things out, okay? So is Miss Montgomery back with us? Marlisa?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, but I can't see you. I see your chin.
Okay, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you fine. Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm glad we finally got you on. I was going to wing it.
Yes, you're good. You could do it.
Miss Montgomery, this is Miss Montgomery from the Genieve Shelter. I appreciate you for joining us on today. I was right in the midst of enlightening everybody about the percentage of domestic violence that have increased since COVID. If you had some more information to share about that, I would greatly appreciate that.
Well, the increase of the hotline calls, I can certainly say, have increased by 109%.
Wow.
Since the pandemic, and their numbers are continuing to rise as the new numbers due to the Delta variant is soaring. So the numbers are continuing to increase. And the problem that we're seeing lately over the last month is due to the fact that the crimes are more serious, more imminent danger situations that we're encountering. So police involvement with our LAP program, which is our lethality assessment program, we're getting those calls on a daily basis from all 6 of our localities.
Okay, so you said imminent danger. Could you enlighten us a little bit on what that actually means?
When we get imminent danger situations, it's usually strangulations, or there is brutal beatings, or it's sexual assaults as well as physical assaults. We are seeing gun bashing in some of these violent situations with the victims that we're serving. And those calls usually come directly from law enforcement, and they connect those clients directly to an advocate on our hotline, on our 24-hour day hotline.
Okay, so not only is it increasing, but the intensity is increasing.
That's correct.
Okay. Wow, that's a large number of, you said 109%. That's a large increase. Yes. And I don't know if my statistics are correct, but the last I remember that there was 1 in 4 women and 1 in maybe 10 men experience domestic violence. Is that accurate, or are
it's
you?
The opposite? It's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men
Oh,
experience domestic
wow.
violence. Yes. Yes.
1 in
1
4.
in 3
And
women will experience domestic violence at some point in their lifetime. And 1 in 4 men will experience some form of domestic violence. And most victims leave at least 7 times before they make that final decision to totally get out of that abusive situation. So they will come into shelter and they will go back and they will return to those abusers. And usually it's a number of 7 times before they're
7
finally done.
times. 7 times they
They
go
go
and
back.
come with their abuser. Now, I think that was powerful because most people from the outside looking in don't understand why people stay with the abuser or why they go back.
And I'm going to highlight I'm going to give you a list of barriers to leaving. And most of the time, when these victims get ready to flee, they have so many things that they're contemplating in their minds as to what's going to happen to them if they flee with children, if they flee and they have absolutely no support. So I have compiled a list, and one of the things that the number one would be a lack of an advocate, meaning they have not made contact with a domestic violence program to get additional assistance. The abuser is influencing them. Threats. Children are basically in school or with friends and they don't want to leave, especially adolescents. And so children cause a lot of these victims to stay in these abusive situations. Victims stay because they want to keep their families together. Pressure from the children not wanting to cooperate. Cultural and racial defenses is one of the reasons why people stay in abusive relationships. Denial, disabilities also cause victims to stay. And again, gaslighting, that's making the survivor really feel like she's crazy and she's not going to be able to get any help. She's not going to get anybody to help her or to help her start her life over. She's been isolated. And so that is another reason why a victim will stay.
Right.
Most of the time, if they have a large family, they will call shelters and they will be turned away because their family sizes are too large.
Wow.
And so victims will stay. In
Yeah.
the rural communities that we serve, a lot of victims stay because they're lacking transportation,
Right.
not understanding that they can call the hotline, the crisis hotline, and they can be picked up from safe sites. And so in the rural communities, a lot of victims stay because they're lacking reliable transportation.
Right. So Marlisa,
Financial need is another reason why they stay.
Okay. So we had one comment that said, are the numbers the way they are because of just the pandemic, or have it been increasing even before that?
The numbers were increasing before that, but when the pandemic hit, victims and survivors, basically, I'm going to say victims, they were basically held hostage with the abusers at home, not working in many cases. So they were totally unable to implement a plan to even flee. And some of these victims have described their scenes and their experiences during the pandemic as like living in a war zone. They were being abused continuously on a daily basis and no reasons that they could ever find to escape because things were closed down. Churches weren't open, businesses weren't open, and the abusers, the perpetrators, weren't going to work and they weren't leaving the home. So it was very, very difficult for these victims to try to flee during the pandemic. So I believe that is another factor that is causing the numbers to increase, because as things are starting to open up and try to return to normalcy, some of these victims are now trying to flee, especially when school opened back up. Many of them were able to orchestrate a plan to flee that abusive situation.
So let me ask you this. I heard you mention because isolation. So So it's almost as if COVID created that perfect storm to trigger violence, because now you're isolated, right? You're
Correct.
having psychological and economical stressors, right? All the I can't go nowhere, I can't do nothing, that came with the pandemic. Negative coping skills, whether it's excessive alcohol consumption, drugs, or anything else. So all of that kind of like created the perfect storm, right? To have a wave of domestic violence increasing.
Correct. And what is so significant about the pandemic and victims, I believe that, sometimes victims don't always know the various types of abuse, but
Mm-hmm.
in many of these cases that we are now hearing about, these women and children were subjected to all types of abuse, multiple problems in the homes. They were being verbally abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, sexually abused, and financially abused. And in some cases, some were starved. Food was being withheld from them. So
Wow.
they really, again, had a lot of trauma going on in these homes during the pandemic. And
Right.
so the moms suffered as well as the children. Not to say that there's just abuse going on with women and children, or because we do serve men victims as well. And then we
Right.
have seen a slight increase of male victims during the pandemic as well. But for the most part, it was families coming in when they were able to be set free, so to speak, when things started to open back up
Mm-hmm.
a few months ago.
Okay. So I want to talk about the red flags.
Okay.
What are some of the red flags that I can tell that I'm being abused? Because I heard you mention gaslighting. So
Yes.
gaslighting now is making me think like that I'm crazy and I'm causing all of this. So what are some of the red flags that we can look for to understand if we're entering into an intimate partner or domestic violence relationship?
Some of the red flags, abusive red flags, everyone should know. The red flags are just that warning, signals that are worth looking at and paying attention to. And so many victims are blindsided and don't take advantage of this information. But the red flags that you should pay attention to, number one, I would say pressures to move fast in a relationship. The person is pushing for an imminent, immediate commitment. They're pushing for you to stay in this relationship when you're still having some doubts. The next thing would be the abuser is had previous abusive relationships, and they are just signs that it's just totally being ignored, just as calling the young lady or the young man every hour on the hour, pressuring
Mm,
him or her to answer the telephone. Stereotypes about gender roles, male supremacy, or dominating and being domineering in the relationship. Also, isolating you from your friends, your family, your coworkers, um, wanting to know your every move, checking up on you constantly. Um, there are just all these red signs, red flag signs that are happening in early stages of the relationship. But sometimes victims will say, "Oh, he's really into me. He's
mm.
jealous, or he's really committing himself to me." But these are usually red flags that this could
Right.
be an abusive relationship.
Right, right. And you said that they had, and one of the ones you said is they were in previous abusive relationships before, which, nowadays I'm wondering if that fast push is hindering you from knowing anything about my past relationships, because I'm moving so fast. We don't even have time to identify and understand what my relationships were before.
And also, in one of the other signs is too, these perpetrators, they don't want you to know their family members. They don't want you to know their friends. They don't want you to know much about them. But they want to know everything about you. And they want to go meet your family members and your friends. And then afterwards, it's usually some negative judgment about those individuals, and that's, you can usually start to see that they would start saying negative things about your friends or your family members to get you in that isolating mode.
Right.
And so but a lot of times, um, usually we're overlooking those signs. Those red flags are usually there 100% of the time, but
Mm-hmm.
we put blinding eyes to it, and we think of it as being cute, or he's really into me, or he's wanting to go to the next level. But those flags are usually there, but we
Right.
just don't take warning and take heed to them.
Right. So one of the question is, how can the church assist in fighting domestic violence?
Well, the church can be supportive, and a lot of times, when victims are trying to get help, they are given misinformed information about, you should pray about it, you should stay in the relationship, you should keep your family together, and you don't need to stay in an abusive relationship when you're getting knocked upside the head and you are being isolated from your family, your friends, and you're not able to have to make decisions, you're not able to have control of your own life. Then, but a lot of times churches are giving out misinformed information, and
Right.
I believe if they would be more receptive to having support groups and connecting the young ladies and young men who are coming to them and disclosing that help is available and connecting them to resources, it would be more beneficial if the churches were doing that.
Right.
And some do a good job, but there are still a lot of churches that really need some help.
Mm-hmm.
And they could very much get help from any domestic violence program, because we are out in the communities and we're trying to do awareness all the time.
Right.
So that would be beneficial to the churches.
Okay. So I have a question for you, because I heard you say that people in domestic violence relationships oftentimes stay because of the children. How detrimental could that be, to stay in this relationship and allow my children to experience this in the name of keeping my family together? What can that do to a child?
Is detrimental to a child. And in some of these cases, unfortunate, these children start to mimic the behaviors that they learn in the homes. Young boys start to become abusers. They start bullying their siblings. They start bullying other children. And unfortunately, usually the girls end up becoming victims of abuse. And they learn to tolerate young men beating on them and controlling them in teen dating relationships. And so most victims don't always think about the effects of domestic violence on children. It is devastating. And they think that the kids are not aware, that the kids don't know, but the kids are aware. They go to school, they're worrying. Some of these children are going to school and not being able to um, concentrate on their education because they are afraid that their mother will not be home when they return from school. It is detrimental to children to live in violent homes. And so when mothers make that mistake, they are not only hurting themselves, but they are hurting their children. And we do
Wow.
have a comprehensive program at our shelter for children, so that children can learn about violent relationships and to help them overcome all of the layers of traumas that they encounter in those violent homes as well. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but a lot of these children are also exposed as well as being physically abused
Yeah.
when they're living in these households.
So I'm not sure about the percentage of that, and things might have changed now, but 1 in 15 maybe children are exposed or witness some kind of domestic violence, that even if the numbers changed 1 in 15, that's
Significant.
scary.
Yes.
That's scary.
Yes.
Because if they're eyewitnessing this, like you said, now they're becoming, maybe either this is the norm.
Right.
This is the norm. So they continue on this same behavior and they learn, and it just goes on for generations because this is how I know how to cope. And to a female, perhaps you hitting me, right? And this may sound distorted to most people, but perhaps you hitting me is how I identify that you love me.
Right. And that's the reason why we try to educate and let these young ladies know that love doesn't hurt. If you're in a relationship and you're being hurt in any form of fashion, your emotions, your um, physical scarring, it is detrimental to you. And love doesn't hurt. That's the one thing that we try to preach to these young ladies all the time. But it's unfortunate, but you're absolutely right. When children encounter living in violent homes, it carries over into their adulthood. And then it's a cycle that they end up having to break. And that sometimes is unfortunate. It goes on to their children and to their grandchildren. And so it's a vicious cycle. And
Right.
as you know, domestic violence doesn't discriminate. And what we did find out is during this pandemic, these children were trapped. They weren't going to
Yeah.
school, so they were seeing and hearing it all. And
Wow.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. And since we're on cycle, I know the cycle of violence, you have the tension phase, the violent phase, the remorse or the honeymoon phase. Tell us a little bit more about this cycle of violence.
The cycle of violence, it's four different phases, as in you just called them off. And what we find in many cases, like I said before, people really want to believe that the person that's hurting them will change. And so they are so forgiving and they don't forget, but they try to go on and think that he's going to change. He's going to say all the right things. He's going to take you to that honeymoon phase. But as you know, it's going to become an explosive phase before it's said and done. And so that's one of the reasons why I think the number is so high with victims going back, because they are usually brainwashed. Some of these victims have low self-esteem. Some of them are embarrassed, to even disclose to their family members that they are in a violent situation. And so they suffer in silence. And it's unfortunate. But the cycle just goes on and on and on from one phase to the next phase to the next phase until they're really ready to get out of it. And
Mhm.
and and, and unfortunately, it's difficult to do, but it is a lot of help out there for victims of domestic violence. There are lots of programs that are out there for domestic violence, and you don't always have to go into a shelter. There are
Right.
services that the programs are offering that women and men can take advantage of without ever entering into the doors. Um, One of the good things about the pandemic, people learned how to do virtual meetings and counseling and
Yeah.
telehealth services. And so you don't ever have to leave. If you can just get to a telephone or get to a computer, you can get that help. And
Right.
those opportunities were open more so due to the pandemic. And so we will continue to do those services even when this pandemic is over. We will continue to provide those types of services to our victims and our survivors. But we did have that challenge of learning that a lot of our victims in our rural communities that we serve
Mm-hmm.
were lacking Wi-Fi. So that was a problem for them. And so we had to create other ways to help them. And so,
Right.
and we're still facing some of those challenges, but we're constantly overcoming them as well.
So when you get people, right, who finally leave, regardless if it's the first, the seventh, the 10th time, how important is it for them to get some license or some counseling, professional counseling? because of this situation.
It's very important. That's the critical piece. The counseling piece is the critical piece because I believe that the counseling can help them overcome all of the traumas and get them to that healing process. And it's a long, gradual process. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight. These young ladies suffer, as I said, in silence, and many, many times they suffer even more so when the black eye is no longer black and the makeup has covered up everything, but the emotional scarring is still there, and they're overplaying these things that they've heard and been called, and the names and the emotional and the psychological abuse is just tremendously damaging to them, and it takes them a long time to overcome. And so I believe that therapy and counseling is the key factor to helping them to overcome.
Right. And, you know, a lot of people want to say domestic violence and they want to, you know, talk about the physical part of it, but the emotional part of it, right? Because at the end of the day, the scar will go away, the bruise will fade, but my emotional stability, my mental stability has been severely damaged. And if I have a mental and emotional stability that is severely damaged, I'm 9 out of 10 times more to stay with that person than not.
Yes, because you don't have the confidence that you can overcome. Your self-esteem has been completely eroded, and you have to find yourself, literally find yourself. You almost have to look in that mirror, face that ghost, and know that you can overcome, you can heal. But for the many of them, that's what we refer to as beaten into submission. They just think there's no way out, there's no help available. They are so afraid to even try. And we see sometimes when they come in like that, there are times by the time we get them situated, get them acclimated at the shelter, and we get back to our resource office, they're gone. Just that quickly. And it's so sad, but it's one of those things that I always say, domestic violence or abuse is just like an addiction, a love
Yes.
addiction, and
Glad
it's
you
real.
said that.
And it's real.
Yeah, it is an addiction. And speaking of addiction, how many of these people are actually addicts? I mean, you know, I don't know if there's a percentage, but either it's drug addiction, sex addiction, alcohol, some kind of substance use addiction that is there, or even control, even
Yes.
a sense of control or narcissistic.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. Many of these victims, they cope with using drugs and alcohol and sexual fantasies and you name it to try to get on with their lives, but not knowing that they are doing more detriment to themselves each and every day when they don't reach out. So we do see a lot of victims coming in and having to connect them to substance abuse programs. And now the new trend is the fact that marijuana was legalized. A lot of these victims feel like they can just use marijuana every day and never go in for help or never use their prescription medications. And so it's becoming even more challenging helping the victims because they want to could feel like they can just continue to smoke and get high, and you know, and their mind is impaired, but
Right.
again, it's their way of coping so that they don't have to be in dealing with the reality of being controlled and abused any longer. So they're
Right.
numbing out. And so
Right.
we see that constantly when
Yeah.
some of the victims come into our programs for services.
Yeah. So they've developed an unhealthy way of coping. However, that's what they have to cope with. So until they leave and get some professional help or get services like the Genieve Shelter offer, this is all I have to cope right now. But Marlisa, I want to ask you a question, and I'm gonna be a little transparent here. In a previous relationship that I was in, you couldn't tell me I was being abused because I fought back.
Okay.
So I didn't think I was in a domestic violence relationship because he wasn't beating me per se. You know, the cops will be called on me just as much as the cops will be called on him because of what I seen in my life. What you wasn't going to do is put your hands on me and not know you was in a fight. I now know that I still was in an abusive relationship.
Yes.
So what would you say to a person like me who perhaps thinks, well, no, I'm not in an abusive relationship because I fight back?
And it's unfortunate that I'm glad you were transparent with sharing that. But what we see a lot of times in cases like that, victims usually fight back, and to the point where at some point, the police bill will be called, and there's what we refer to as cross warrants. They're both coming across aggressively, and the officers can't determine which party is the victim. And so they're both playing the victim role, but at the same time, they have that quote unquote perpetrator role as well. Those are dangerous situations. And it's usually, again, a victim that actually grew up in a situation and was taught to fight back, saw a parent probably fighting back, or was told, I'm not going to let anybody hit me or beat on me, and I'm going to fight back. And those victims are really suffering the most because a lot of times those situations can end in deaths. And it's unfortunate because someone is going to want to get the best of the other party each and every time. And
Man, I want to tap on that one.
I'm not in a domestic violence situation. I'm not a victim because I'm fighting back. I'm not afraid. Those are the victims that we have the hardest time trying to get them through the adjudication process because you have to almost be able to show and exhibit and explain and articulate the fear level. And these victims are not fearful. They're just really sick in mind with thinking that they can beat this person. But the game is one is going to outdo the other.
Yeah.
And eventually it can be a lethality assessment where the danger is so imminent that somebody will come out in a body bag.
Right. So my thing is this, and I'm glad you brought this up, right? So you're watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and we're talking about domestic violence awareness with Ms. Montgomery of the Genieve Shelter, and I was just transparent sharing my little part of my story of Marlisa, you had said something about that's dangerous. I remember making my silent vow that no mother's son is going to put his hands on me. That was my silent vow made as a young girl from the things that I've seen and been through and witnessed. So that silent vow, like you said, was dangerous because the relationship that I was in, it almost became, I have to get you before you get me.
Correct.
And that is a dangerous place to be in. And I'm speaking on a personal level here. It is a dangerous place to be in because you're always on guard. I felt like I was always on guard. Whether it was sleeping with a knife, whether it was having a 22 on the side, whether it was having a bat, you name it, my body was always ready for a fight. And it hindered relationships because I was always ready for a fight. So being in domestic violence, whether you're the one fighting back or not, and I want to shift a little bit because you said both of them, the man and the woman, are playing the victim, or the perpetrator role. But what happens when the man is really the victim?
Well, when the man is really the victim, you see all of the classic signs that you see with a female victim. He's going through emotional scarring. He's emotional. He is concerned about his children. He's really afraid. He's paranoid. The trauma level is equally the same when you do really see a male victim, and it's rare, but you do see them, and it's unfortunate because these men, they're laughed at, they're marked and made to be, the scapegoats in the court settings because, how dare you be a man and be that weight. But when we do see them, it's a lot of trauma that they are encountering as well. And that we have to provide the same sort of services that we provide for our female clients and victims. But again, I will say it's a small percentage compared to what we see with women and children.
Yeah. And I don't think most men will even call the police or reach out, because like you said, they're either laughed at or, some kind of way made fun of, or, you know, you being abused. So what would you say to a man if they were watching? What would you say to our viewers who's a man being abused?
I would say get out, get help. You are a victim and you're suffering as well, and help is available to you. And you know that you are suffering, and you know that you are the victim, and you know that you would never put your hands on a woman, and you know that she's doing everything to erode your self-esteem. She's sabotaging your house, your plans, and she's controlling you. You should get out as well.
Mhm.
That's what I would tell a male victim as well.
One of the comments said, how do they get help? So would they take the same avenue as a woman to get help, or will they perceive that the help wouldn't be there because they're a man?
They would perceive that the help wouldn't be there because they are a man, and they will be afraid. Most of the time when these guys call the hotline, it's like they're trying to say, can you help her? I'm the one that's being abused, but I want to get help for my family. But the first thing I would say is to connect to a domestic violence program, because many times when they do call, unless it's a serious situation and the police and law enforcement isn't needed, call them first. But in many cases, if you know that you're suffering and you are too embarrassed and you're too ashamed, call a domestic violence program and get some guidance and get some help.
Mhm.
And they will help you just like they would help a female victim.
What would you say to the family and the friends of the individual who keeps going back and they lose support because, we're tired of seeing you go back? We've helped many a times. We got you out. We provided a way, but yet you would give back. You keep going back.
I
What
would
would
say
you
to the
say?
family, to the friends, never give up. Never lose sight. You may not be the one that's willing to bring them back into your home, or because a lot of times this is what we refer to, they have burned all of their bridges. But if they reach out to you, please try to at least connect them to a program. Um, that's what I would tell a family member, a friend, a coworker, a member of the church. If you have someone that's disclosing that they are in an abusive relationship, they need your support. They need your guidance. They don't need you to turn your back on them at that point in time. They don't need you to be judgmental. They need support. And
Mhm.
you can give them support by connecting them to some resources if you're unwilling to look beyond all the times that they have gone back
Mhm.
and you were involved with helping them get support.
Right.
Just connect them to some resource of advocacy or crisis hotline where they can actually talk to an advocate.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and it's really important because a lot of people, they get tired too. They get tired too. It's here you go again, and you're putting the children through it. Is there things that we should not say to an individual who's going through?
I think the things that you should not say is to stay. You're going to just go back anyway. You should just stay in it. Keep your family together. Look beyond that. I think those are wrong things to say to a victim. That's the wrong thing to say to someone that's seeking help. Just give them an inspiring word, encouraging them, empowering them to just try. Just keep telling them, don't stop trying. Even if you go back 1,000 times, just try to get out of that situation, and just letting them know that you love them enough to give them a kind, caring word of encouragement is very beneficial, I believe.
Wow, Lashandra said, "Don't say you can work it out for the kids." Yeah, that is powerful, and
And don't
and
tell them that they can pray about it, because we know prayer can change everything. But
yeah,
I believe that you're doing them a disservice to tell them to pray about it when you get someone knocking you upside your head and you're constantly walking on eggshells, and
right.
your children are living these horror scenes. Um, that's the wrong information to tell a victim
Yeah.
as well.
Or if you're going to tell them pray about it, tell them pray about it on their way out the door.
Yes.
And I think that's so important, because even in our church community there is domestic violence, and people think that that's not the case, but regardless of the nationality of the church or the denomination, there's physical and emotional and domestic violence happening too.
All the times, even in the pulpit, we
Yeah.
see it all the time.
Hmm.
Some of our, I would tell the public, the perpetrators that we watch out, and those are the most dangerous situations, are usually police officers, um, pastors, and military families. They really suffer, and they suffer in silence for much too long.
Yeah, it's hard because sometimes if the individual has a certain status in the community,
Correct.
how do I go and say I'm in this if you have this status in the community?
Many times, you know, victims don't always know that you can call crisis hotline, and you can be anonymous, and you can get the help that you need and get the information that you need. You don't always have to disclose who he is or who she is, because of fear of what their status is. We see that happening a lot of times, especially people in powerful positions. They are afraid to tell their employers, fear of losing their jobs, or losing a status, or losing um, clearance, or things like that. And so they continue to suffer. But you can get help without um, giving your name. You can get help without telling anything about the perpetrator. So you still can be given guidance and supportive resources that could be helpful.
What about the ones who do get away, and they're starting over new, and now they're being stalked, because that's
Very
a form
dangerous.
too.
Yes. And that is happening more and more, when victims are being stalked. And but there are programs, and believe it or not, we can almost put a victim into like protective custody. We can get them into other programs out of the state, and other states that will work with us. Other cities will work with us. We can do a lot to protect the victim. They can have their names changed, their social security changed. It's a process. It's a gradual process, but victims can get these types of services if they get into domestic violence programs. We have some situations that are so dangerous, where mothers will never be able to collect child support because of the fear of the abusers finding them. And so that's how dangerous some of these situations are.
Wow.
Um, the children will never be able to see those biological fathers, fear of the mother being killed or stalked. And so they have to forego services. So we sometimes have to do a lot of maneuvering and navigating to get social services to help them, to the point where we almost have to treat them as if they're undocumented just to get them some help.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I wanna backtrack a step, because you had mentioned about don't tell them, to stay, and for the kids or anything else like that. What happens when it's someone that you value their opinion? Um, Here I go in my transparency. When someone tells you to go back after you have left, and then they convince you to go back to this abusive relationship, almost as if it was another form of abuse, manipulative, because now you're telling me to go back because perhaps he didn't really mean it, or perhaps he was under a lot of stress. But now you're telling me, whether it is, your mother, your father, your clergy, your friends, or whatever, telling you to go back. Would that be a form of abuse on that individual's part to now tell me to go back to this?
Yes. Yes, that's a form of abuse. That's a form of betrayal, and it's unfortunate that people will pass the buck, and it's the ideal situation. I want them out of my hair. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be mixed up in this, and so you'll give them misinformed information. But at the same time, you just put this family back in harm's way, and it can be devastating because a lot of the 7 times they don't always come out alive. And
My God.
so, we hear these victims cry out in silence, and we see them come in and out in black body bags. And so to tell a young lady that's helpless and hopeless to go back because you don't want to be involved, or you are tired, or you don't want these kids and this family in your household, or they're just too much to bear, it's really bad, misinformed information, and can be lifetime of trauma to that family, and can, in some cases, can be devastating and detrimental, and in some cases that individual can go back and lose her life or his life, in these situations.
Yeah. Yeah. Marlisa, I just thank you because it's just been, whew. She said it can also be, well, how are you going to make it without him or her? And that's that financial part. How are you going to make it?
Help is available. Like I say, we at all of the domestic violence programs, you go on a mission to figure out how, and it's the hardest thing because what people don't always understand, when victims come into domestic violence shelters, in many cases, they're just coming in with what they have on their backs. So we have to figure out to get every component of their lives pieced back together again, and with the hope and intent and the gratification of they will go out the door better than they came in. And so we try to connect them with employment, we try to connect them with housing programs, we try to connect them with the therapist, we try to provide every component that's going to rebuild that life, and hoping to get them into a situation where they're stable and can sustain. But many times it's very challenging, and so that financial piece is one of the things that will cause a person to go back. Sometimes it's the battles with custody issues, because you don't always think about most domestic violence victims who actually get the police involved. They're going to court probably about 7 times before it's all said and done.
Wow.
And just to get an emergency protective order, that's a 3-part process: an emergency protective order, a preliminary protective order, and then the final protective order. So that's 3 different times that you have to go in order to get that process. And then you have everything else with the assault and battery, the custody issues. It's really challenging for these victims. And
Mhm.
so, but support and programs are out there with lots of resources. And that's why it's important for people to support domestic violence programs. And I was just talking to a young lady today, and she said, well, it's easy to support breast cancer awareness, but it's shameful to own up that you would support a domestic violence program because, people don't want to be associated with
Yeah.
knowing a victim or being a part of a domestic violence program. And so that's why I believe domestic violence get lost in the month of October,
Right.
because some people are ashamed that they have been involved or had a family member or suffered in domestic violence, and they want to block it out and put blinding houses on it.
Right.
And so it's easier for them to support the other cause and not pay attention to both causes with equal um, support.
Right. So before we do talk about how we can, help and support, I want to know how important it is for intimate partner violence individuals to have a safety plan. How important is a safety plan when you're in a domestic violence relationship?
Safety plan is the key to getting out and fleeing, staying alive. It is important that you can safety plan with a professional from one of the programs. You have to have that safety plan. And it's unfortunate most people who are in domestic violence situations cannot safety plan alone, because you're not going to think of everything. You're not going to, what you would think is safe could be really dangerous to you. We see it happening all the time. I get victims tell me all the time, I'm leaving, but I don't want to go to a shelter. So tell me where you're going to go. Oh, I'm going to go to my mother's house, or I'm going to go to my father's house. I'm going to go to my family. Well, again, think about this. You are just putting your parents in harm's way, because if that perpetrator wants to get you, the first place they're going to go is the place you frequent the most. And
Mhm.
so a safety planning is the critical piece, and you definitely need to work with an advocate to create that safety plan. And you need to rehearse that safety plan with you and your children, and you need to make sure that you are safety planning, and the people that you want to be involved in your safety plan are people that you really truly can trust, but is not people that you should be putting in harm's way.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for that information, and I also want to say domestic violence is very, very near and dear to my heart. So I support domestic violence 110%. Being a child as well as an adult. As an adult woman, part of domestic violence, and then I also want to say that breast cancer also is near and dear to me, because I lost my mother, my grandmother, and some friends. So, it kind of hurt to say that, you would support one and not the other, because they are both just
Equal.
as, yeah, just as
Yeah.
important and equal.
I
So,
always say I wish I could just create that pin or that display where you have your pink and your purple combined together, because
well, do it. I'll
it's
support
dear.
you.
Yes, it's dear to my heart, both causes, and they're both significant. And one can't go without the other.
Right.
Many times people don't understand. Survivors of breast cancer are also survivors of domestic violence as
That's
well.
right. That's right. That's right. So, Marlise, I know you have something called Dollar Days coming up, but tell us how we can help, how people can help, the shelters, how we can donate. Tell us about that.
Okay, how can you help? We need volunteers. That's important to us. Volunteers is giving of your time, giving of your funds. But basically, we cannot survive without volunteers. So we have volunteer trainings coming up. We have one coming up on October 26th. If you're interested in becoming a volunteer, please feel free to call our agency and we can send you an electronic copy of our volunteer application. You can also help by financially supporting the shelter. We have a gift of $31 for the month of October, which is our dollar a day fundraising project, and it's for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And you can pay online. You can go to our website, or you can mail a check into the Genieve Shelter. But you can help in many ways. You can think of a fundraising event that you would like to do with your contacts and your social media buddies. Feel free to do so because opportunities are always needed and funding is always critical to keep the doors open for domestic violence programs. And you can feel free, if you know of someone that's in a domestic violence situation or have disclosed that they're being abused, please feel free to give them our hotline number. And that number is 1-800-969-4673. Again, 1-800-969-4673. And you can always look on our website and you can get connected to services from clicking on our website, which is thegeneveshelter.org.
Thank you for that information. And I have also posted it on all of my social media sites. The Dollar Days flyer for the shelter, I have definitely posted that, and I will keep reposting that throughout the month of October. But you need funding, not just during domestic violence awareness.
Thank
right?
you very much.
Funding all year long.
All year long. I need funding all year long because we're a small agency and a lot of people don't know about the rural areas. We're lacking a lot of the resources that some of the other larger programs are offering. And we are small, but big in heart. We have actually the largest territory across the entire state of Virginia out of all of the domestic violence programs. We cover 6 localities. Wow. Smithfield, Franklin, Isle of Wight, Surrey, Southampton, and Suffolk, of course. And so we have the largest territory. And unfortunate, our territory is all rural communities. So we definitely need the support all year long. Yeah. And every day is important to have funding as well as volunteers to help us carry on our mission.
Okay. Well, Marlisa, I thank you so much. I'm glad we worked out all of our technical difficulties. I'm glad you was able to join us and bring and shed some light on domestic violence awareness. Like I said, I will constantly keep posting the Dollar Days flyer to get support in. $31 is a drop in the bucket. You know, y'all need, like you said, you supply need to a lot of rural areas, 6 locations. So you guys need a lot of funding, and we need to step up and help domestic violence because it is increasing. I want to say thank you to everybody who was watching. Marlisa, thank you again for joining. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to Real Talk with Ellasin. We definitely will have some more information as far as domestic violence goes. Coming up later this month, we're going to be talking to a few individuals who will be sharing their story, as well as me, as well as Ellasin. I will be giving out some of my story because a lot of people don't know my story, but God told me it's time. So I will also be sharing my story with that. And we will also be talking with some survivors of breast cancer. So we're not going to shun away on breast cancer either. So I want to thank everyone. Marlisa, again, you for being here. You guys look up the Genieve Shelter. It's www.geneveshelter.org. We flashed the hotline number already if you need any help. And we want to thank you guys again. Thank you for watching Real Talk with Ellasin. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you.